Niyama literally means positive duties or observances. In Indian traditions, particularly yoga, niyamas and its complement, dhammas, are recommended activities and habits for healthy living, spiritual enlightenment and liberated state of existence. It has multiple meanings depending on context in Hinduism. In Buddhism, the term extends to the determinations of nature, as in the Buddhist Niyama dhammas. In Pali the spelling Niyama is often used. Hinduism, virtues are extensively discussed in various ancient and medieval era texts of Hinduism. In its yoga school, they are described in first two of 8 limbs. The first limb is called Yamas, which include virtuous self-restraints. The second limb is called niyamas, which include virtuous habits, behaviors and observances. These virtues and ethical premises are considered in Hinduism as necessary for an individual to achieve a self-realized, enlightened, liberated state of existence. 5 niyamas in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. The niyamas are the second limb of the 8 limbs of yoga. Sadhanapada verse 32 lists the niyamas as auca, purity, clearness of mind, speech and body; santosa, contentment, acceptance of others and of one's circumstances as they are; optimism for self; tapas, austerity, self-discipline; persistent meditation, perseverance; svadhyaya, study of self, self-reflection, introspection of self's thoughts, speeches and actions; svara pranidhana, contemplation of the Ishvara. 10 niyamas. In the diverse traditions and historical debate within Hinduism, some texts suggest a different and expanded list of niyamas. For example, the Chandogya and Varu Upanishads, the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, the verses 552 to 557 in Book 3 of the Tirumandaram of Tirumala suggest 10 niyamas, in the sense of positive duties, desirable behaviors and discipline. The Hatha Yoga Pradipika lists the 10 niyamas in the following order. In verse 1.18, tapas, persistence, perseverance in one's purpose; austerity, santosa, contentment, acceptance of others and of one's circumstances as they are; optimism for self; astika, faith in real self, belief in God; conviction in Vedas, Upanishads; dana, generosity, charity, sharing with others; svara pujana, worship of the Ishvara; Siddhantavakyusravana, listening to the ancient scriptures; Hari, remorse and acceptance of one's past; modesty, humility; mati, think and reflect to understand, reconcile conflicting ideas; japa, mantra repetition, reciting prayers and knowledge; huta, rituals, ceremonies such as yajna, sacrifice. Some texts replace the last niyama of huta with vrata. The niyama of vrata means making and keeping one's vows, which may be pious observances. For example, a promise to fast and visit a pilgrimage site is a form of vrata. The education process in ancient India, where Vedas and Upanishads were memorized and transmitted across generations without ever being written down, required a series of vrata niyamas over a number of years. Other numbers of niyamas. At least 65 ancient and medieval era Indian texts are known so far that discuss niyamas and yamas. Most are in Sanskrit, but some are in regional Indian languages of Hindus. The number of niyamas mentioned in these texts range from just 1 to 11, however 5 and 10 are the most common. The order of listed niyamas, the names and nature of each niyama, as well as the relative emphasis vary between the texts. For example, Sri Prashna Samhita discusses only one niyama in verse 3.22, and that niyama being ahimsa. Shiva Yoga Dipika, Sharada Tilaka, Vasishtha Samhita, Yoga Kalpalatika, Jajnavakyusmiti and many others, each discuss 10 niyamas. Bhagavata Purana discusses 11 niyamas, with kind hospitality hospitality of guests to one's best ability as an additional virtuous behavior. Other texts substitute one or more different concepts in the list of niyamas. For example, in the 5 niyamas listed by Markandeya Purana in verse 36.17, Matanga Parameshvaram in verse 17.31, and Pasupata Sutta in verse 1.9, each suggest Akrita as a niyama. Many of the texts match Patanjali's 5 niyamas. Ahimsa is the most widely discussed ethical theory, and highlighted as the highest virtue by majority of these texts. Overlap between yamas and niyamas. Some yamas are understood as reverse of niyamas in Hatha Yoga Pradipika. For example, ahimsa and mitahara are called as yama as well as niyama in verse 1.17 and 1.40. The text calls ahimsa as the highest virtuous habit, mitahara as the best personal restraint, and sadhana as the foremost of asana in verse 1.40. Buddhism. In Buddhist commentary we find the Pancavada Niyama, fivefold niyama, which occurs in the following texts. In the Apthasalini, the commentary attributed to Buddhaghosa on the Dhammas Angani, the first book of the Theravada Abhidhamma Pitaka. In the Sumangala Vilasini, Buddhaghosa's commentary on the Daya Nikaya. In the Abhidhamma Vatara, a verse summary of Abhidhamma by Buddhaghosa's contemporary, Buddhadatta. Abhidhamma Matika internal commentary. The Abhidhamma Matika is a matrix of abstracts for the Abhidhamma, with lists of pairs and triplets of terms from which the whole of the text can theoretically be reconstructed. The passage on the niyamas is from an internal commentary on the Matika associated with the Dhammas Angani, and was composed in South India by Kalaratha Kasapa. Abhidhamma Vatara Puranati, composed by in Sri Lanka by Vasasara Mafasami c. 13th century, Sariputta c. 12th century. This text is a commentary on the text of the Abhidhamma Vatara Namarupa Parashado, so is technically a sub-commentary. This commentary is an incomplete word-by-word commentary. Utu niyama, the constraint of the seasons, i.e. in certain regions of the earth at certain periods the flowering and fruiting of trees all at one time, the blowing or ceasing of wind, the degree of the heat of the sun, the amount of rainfall, some flowers like the lotuses opening during the day and closing at night, and so on. Bija niyama, the constraint of seeds or germs, i.e. a seed producing its own kind as barley seed produces barley. Kama niyama, the constraint of kama, i.e. good actions produce good results and bad actions produce bad results. This constraint is said to be epitomized by verse 127, which explains that the consequences of actions are inescapable. Chitta niyama, the constraint of mind, i.e. the order of the process of mind activities as the preceding thought moment causing and conditioning the succeeding one in a cause and effect relation. Dhamma niyama, the constraint of dhammas, i.e. such events like the quaking of the 10,000 world systems at the Bodhisattva's conception in his mother's womb and at his birth. At the end of the discussion Sumangala Vilasini passage, the commentary says that Dhamma niyama explains the term dhammata in the text of the Mahapadana Sutta. In these texts the fivefold niyama was introduced into commentarial discussions not to illustrate that the universe was intrinsically ethical but as a list that demonstrated the universal scope of Paticca Samuppada. The original purpose of expounding fivefold niyama was, according to Ledi Sayadaw, neither to promote or to demote the law of karma, but to show the scope of natural law as an alternative to the claims of theism. C.A. F. Rhys Davids was the first Western scholar to draw attention to the list of Pancavada Niyama. In her little book of 1912 entitled simply Buddhism, her reason for mentioning it was to emphasize how for Buddhism Buddhism, we exist in a moral universe in which actions lead to just consequences according to a natural moral order, a situation she calls a cosmodicy, in contrast with the Christian theodicy. In Mrs. Rhys Davids' scheme, the niyamas become karma niyama, consequences of one's actions. Utu niyama, seasonal changes and climate, law of non-living matter. Bija niyama, laws of heredity. Chitta niyama, will of mind. Dhamma niyama, nature's tendency to perfect. This is similar to the scheme proposed by Ledi Sayadaw. Western Buddhist Sangha Rakshita has taken up Mrs. Rhys Davids' conception of the niyamas and made it an important aspect of his own teachings on Buddhism. Spelling in Pali, the word is spelled both niyama and niyama, and the Pali Text Society Dictionary says that the two forms have become confused. It is likely that niyama is from a causative form of the verb ni square root I. See also karma in Buddhism.